devotees. It is the verse 64 from chapter 2. Ragadvesha vimukhtaistu vishayan indriyaischaran atmavasyair vidheyatma prasadam adhigacchati. Ragadvesha vimukhtaistu vishayan indriyaischaran atmavasyair vidheyatma prasadam adhigacchati. Ragadvesha vimukhtaistu vishayan indriyaischaran atmavasyair vidheyatma prasadam adhigacchati. Feel free to recite, a couple of you who would like to do that.
Ragadvesha vimukhtaistu vishayan indriyaischaran atmavasyair vedyatma prasadam adhigacchati.
Ragadesha vimukhtaistu visayan indriyascharan atma vasayar vidyatma prasadam adhigacchati.
Thank you very much. So let's go over the translation and verse by verse, word by word translation by His Divine Grace. So should I share that also? Maybe. I don't have that. 1 second. I think I have the okay. So here is the verse. So word by word translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Raga, attachment. Dvesha, and detachment. Vimuktai, by one who has become free from. Tu, but. Vishayan, sense objects. Indriyai, by the senses. Charan, acting upon. Atmavasyair, under one's control. Vidheyatma, one who follows regulated freedom. Prasadam, the mercy of the Lord. Adhigacchati, attains. So translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. But a person free from all attachment and aversion and able to control his senses through regulated principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. Let's read again. But a person free from all attachment and aversion and able to control his senses through regulative principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. Purport. It is already explained that one may externally control the senses by some artificial process, but unless the senses are engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is every chance of a fall. Although the person in full Krishna consciousness may apparently be on the sensual plane, because of his being Krishna conscious, he has no attachment to sensual activities. The Krishna conscious person is concerned only with the satisfaction of Krishna and nothing else. Therefore, he is transcendental to all attachment and detachment. If Krishna wants, the devotee can do anything which is ordinarily undesirable. And if Krishna does not want, he shall not do that which he would have ordinarily done for his own satisfaction. Therefore, to act or not to act is within his control, because he acts only under the direction of Krishna. This consciousness is the causeless mercy of the Lord, which the devotee can achieve in spite of his being attached to the sensual platform. Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shriyuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagra Raghunathamitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parjana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhamitanscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesh Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Anmostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Shrimade Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaurvani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyaristarane Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So let's look at the verse one more time. Raga Dvaisha Vimuktastu Vishayan Indriyaishchan Atma Vasher Vidheyatma Prasadam Adhigachati. So Raga Dvaisha, attachment and aversion. Vimukta, he's free, that person who is free. And he is Atma Vasher of Indriya. So he is in control of his senses, and he's Vidheyatma. So he is following regulative principles which lead to freedom. And the outcome is that prasadam adhigachati. He can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. So if you see, this is the answer by Lord Sri Krishna in response to Arjuna's question, which he asked in one of the previous verses. He started asking about the symptoms of a sthita pragya, of a person who is self-realized in Krishna consciousness. And one of the questions was that, how does a self-realized person engage his senses in this world? How does, Kim Vrajeta was the question. So how does one use or engage one's senses in this world? And this verse, which we just now looked at, is the answer in response to this question. So this verse will explain how the self-realized person is actually using his senses in a very harmonious way and not in a destructive way. So I would like to actually look at the first part of the verse. Okay, I think I'll go back and I will look at the. So this is the verse, right? So Raga Dvaisha Vimuktastu. So person is free from attachment and aversion. And Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport the meaning of this, that how this person who has all these senses, he has bodily senses, and he has bodily needs, he has sensual needs. At the same time, he is acting in the world without any attachment and aversion. And Srila Prabhupada spends the entire purport explaining to us as to how is that possible. And he says that there is every chance that because we have body and we have to operate in this material world, there is every chance of a fall down. So Srila Prabhupada somewhere else mentions that there is every chance of an accident on the royal road. So even though there are so many restrictions, there could be temptations, and it is difficult to control. But Srila Prabhupada explains that a person who is devoted to Krishna, who is trying to follow a devotional lifestyle for the pleasure of Lord Krishna, he is capable of detaching himself or herself while acting in this material world. And that person is not only free from attachment, but also is free from aversion, which means it's not just that I am detached from my enjoyment, but something unpleasant comes on my way. Still, I'm all right with that. So that is the meaning of aversion, freedom from aversion. And Srila Prabhupada mentions that this is possible because in Krishna consciousness, the person directly acts under the direction of Krishna, which is given to him or her through within the heart or from outside through the gurus or the devotee association. And it's very interesting that Srila Prabhupada mentions that if Krishna wants, this person can do something very different, which is not ordinarily socially done, or this person can completely avoid or shall not do, which would have been ordinarily done. And it's difficult to understand, but with an example, it's easy. So I'll give you an example of all the 6 Goswamis, who are the primary disciples of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And they have, their life stories have very well demonstrated as to how this freedom from attachment and freedom from aversion is possible. Raghunath Das Goswami, one of those 6 Goswamis, who was a very rich person from his family background, was able to give up everything for the service of the Lord. But when Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentioned to him that it's not the right time and he should be patient and tolerantly, he should wait, then he immediately went back to his family and he acted like a perfect son, perfect husband, and a perfect businessman until the Lord gave further instructions. So this is just one example. And, when we start devotional service in the association of devotees, we gradually can experience that how we also are able to display and actually practice some of this detachment from wants and likes, and detachment from hatredness. Like, I don't like this, but when Krishna consciousness is practiced, we go beyond this liking and disliking, because everything is done in the service of the Lord. But the second part of the verse, we will direct our discussion towards that mainly. And let me share it again. So the second part of the verse is regulative principles of freedom that are followed in a way that enables one to control its senses. And so today's discussion your life side, which lead to freedom. So through regulation, how can achieve freedom and what kind of freedom? And then when one does this, the mercy of the Lord is obtained. So let's look at more in detail as to what exactly these things are and how we can practice them. So you see, regulation. So regulations are not foreign to us in this world, right? In every walk of life, we come across regulations and we follow them. We never complain, because we are brought up and we are taught in a way that that you need to follow regulations. For example, there are so many social regulations as to how we behave, how we dress up, how we walk and talk in this world. There are so many regulations of the government. You have if you want to be a nice citizen, there are so many regulations in terms of laws, and so many regulations for income, expenses, properties. There's so many of the regulations, and we all follow them without any much complaint. Similarly, if somebody has medical problems, we all know, we all take medicines very regularly. It's, there's a whole lifestyle where if somebody is fighting with a disease, then there are not only medicines that are taken on a regular basis, but there's a whole lifestyle. There's some things that have to be given up. Some food has to be given up. Some exercise has to be taken up, and that all we have to do it on a very regular basis, very consistent basis, with time schedules, with time management, because the health is benefited if we have regulations, right? So when Krishna says in the Gita that you have to follow rules and regulations, sometimes we don't like it. Sometimes in the beginning we feel, oh, there are so many restrictions and rules, and people have so many questions and doubts whether it will work or not. But Krishna is assuring here that you follow the rules and regulations that are given to you in the scriptures, especially in our Vedic scriptures in Bhagavad-Gita. And Krishna is promising here that if you follow these rules and regulations, you'll be actually free. And we will talk more about what kind of freedom we will have. And Krishna not only says that, but he promises that once you have these this freedom, then that will be my mercy for your further progress, right? So let's see. So scripturally regulated human life. Now, there's one interesting purport by Srila Prabhupada in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. There he's explaining that animals also have regulated lives. But for example, say the tiger has a regulation in terms of eating, how the tiger lives. But Srila Prabhupada says that that regulated animal life is different from a human life. Human life is particularly meant for regulations. Let me actually read that purport to you. Srila Prabhupada mentions that human beings are meant for regulated life. By nature, there is regulation in animal life also, but that is not like the regulative life as described in the scriptures or by authorities. Human life is regulated life, not animal life. In regulated life only can one understand transcendental knowledge. So what he means is that the animal life may be regulated in terms of the basic needs, eating, sleeping, mating, defending. But the animals may not go beyond that, and the animals may not be able, they are not able to understand the real reasons for the regulations. They will not be able to practice something which is necessary for their ultimate freedom. But human life is especially meant for understanding the scriptural regulations. Animals will not come into the classes, even though they have regulated lives in terms of their habits, but they will not be able to come to a class which explains the scriptures. It's only for humans. As Srila Prabhupada mentions here, that the scriptures or the authorities will tell us what actual regulation of life means, and that life will lead to transcendental knowledge. Right? So I just wanted to mention, bring that point here. And then let's look at my PowerPoint here again. Okay. So scripturally regulated human life is something that we have to understand, because Krishna is explaining, is asking us to do that in this world, right? So primarily, it is with respect to our eating habits, sleeping habits, mating habits, and defending habits, the whole lifestyle. I'm not sure about how many of maybe slightly new to this congregation, and they may not know some of the terms. So I just put a little explanation here, because it will be very helpful to understand the meaning of senses and how do we regulate the senses with the sense objects. So we all know we have senses: eyes, ears, nose, skin, and tongue. And the senses are always busy to get attached to the sense objects. Say, for example, the eyes are looking for a nice form. The eyes want to get satisfied by looking at a form which is pleasurable, and the eyes want to avoid some form which is not so much pleasurable. Similarly, the ears hanker for a good sound, some sound that will satisfy our ears, and the ears will reject those sounds which are not pleasurable to them. Similarly, the nose, the sense object is smell. For the skin, the sense object is touch. And for the tongue, the sense object is taste. So if you can see, all these senses are hankering for these sense objects to look at nice forms, nice sounds, nice smell, nice touch, nice taste. And the senses are trying to avoid all of these which are not pleasurable. So that is the business of the senses. And we in the bodily, in our lives, we are basically using our senses to produce happiness, to produce pleasure. And regulation means, of course, something limiting, something that we are not allowed to do without restriction, something that is we are not allowed to do without limits. So freedom by regulation, how can we do that? So when Krishna says that you please follow the regulated life, that does not mean that you stop using these senses to obtain happiness or to obtain enjoyment. So pleasure is not denied, but pleasure is regulated. And that regulation comes by discipline. Slight discipline, but there are so many benefits of that discipline that we will look at later. So for example, as we saw, regulation in terms of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So in terms of eating, the regulation is that, of course, you enjoy food. You enjoy palatable dishes with your tongue so that your tongue can be satisfied. But instead of eating something whimsically that pleases you and your tongue without any restrictions, you eat vegetarian food, or best is that you eat prasad, which is offered to Lord Krishna and obtain as his mercy. So you see, the discipline can bring our tongue under control. And in spite of that control, the tongue is still able to enjoy. So it's a little discipline or regulation. Similarly, in terms of sleeping. Now, sleeping can really mean the healthy habits. Like obviously we have a regulation in terms of our time schedule. And if people are following a nice life, healthy lifestyle, they will not sleep late at night. They will not sleep during the day. So there's a little pattern, there's a little discipline in how we go to bed and how we wake up early in life. So that's the regulation. Similarly, mating, which is sex life. So the regulation is the Vivaha Yajna, right? In the house, in the Vedic scripture, we have a holy marriage, sacred marriage. And sex life within the married life is completely allowed. And that way, the household life can be managed. And finally, defending means creating security. If you see, all of us are busy creating different kinds of securities for our lives. Even the animals are busy, but we are more sophisticated in our creation of securities around us. So when we have regulated security, that means we will accept only moral professions, and we will not do something whimsical, something which is illegal, something which is abominable. And we will not do some money earning just for greed. So if you can see, there's a slight modification, but the modification is done in such a way that we can live our life on a regular basis. We can enjoy our life as usual, but just with a little bit of discipline, because we are putting Krishna in the middle, right? And that's how we are going to follow, because Krishna is recommending that to us. So let's look more into this. Rules and regulations, if we are not aware as what is meant in the scriptures, if you're not informed about what exactly is that, we can see rules and regulations as restrictions, as something suppressing, as something limiting, and then we dislike it. But if you have proper knowledge, proper information, then it can work as a protection. The same rules and regulations which seem to be restricting, they're actually beneficial in the longer run, and they can actually work for us as a protection. So, for example, if you see the children, now we have restrictions for children, right? We all know, like, we all want to give restrictions. So the children don't like it many times. They hate parents for putting limits. They hate parents for putting the rules of the house. But ultimately, when this, they do not realize, the kids don't realize that it's for their good, it's for their protection, it's for their upbringing. But the same kids, when they grow up and they become parents, they put the same rules on their kids, right? Because when they grow up, they realize that these restrictions are necessary because they will protect my child from doing wrong things. So when they are informed, when they were uninformed as children, they find those limitations, the restrictions as a problem and a dislike. But when they are experienced, when they grow up and they become experienced as parents, then they are aware of why these restrictions are necessary, and they will bring the protection to the children. Similarly, let me go back to the so similarly, if we are spiritually informed about the scriptures and their instructions, then we can see these rules and regulations as the moral fence for our protection. Let's take an example, like if someone is sitting in a, if somebody is protected in a fort, and that person is protecting himself from the decoys, from the people who are doing a riot, and he is limited in the fort, but he's protected. So that person may think that, oh, I am limited here, my movements are limited within the fort, and that person sees that as a problem, tries to go out of the fort. Then the decoys can kill that person. But if that person understands that staying within the fort and limiting my own movements is all right because actually I'm going to be saved and protected, then that is a really intelligent work, right? So similarly, when the scriptures tell us that do this and don't do this, do's and don'ts, and we may take some time to actually implement them, because sometimes it's hard, when we come to Krishna consciousness, sometimes things are very new to us, and we may feel, oh, this is something I never did in my life. And some of our family members may not agree immediately, but it's a slow process, but slow and sure, because when we understand the real purpose behind these restrictions or regulations, then we can see that they are actually for our protection, because they will save us from many different things, which can even harm us materially or harm us spiritually. So I think I missed one point here. Let me go back. That slide. It says about the freedom, because we are ultimately, our objective is to gain freedom, right? So let's talk more about what kind of freedom we are going to give, right? So let's see, even materially speaking, like in general, not generalized, there are rules and regulations and about, say, for example, alcohol. Like people are told, they are taught not to drink too much of alcohol, or sometimes not at all drink alcohol. So what happens if somebody is unrestricted in alcohol consumption? Obviously, there are so many problems that can come up. Medical, like health problems, financial problems, social problems, family problems, all of that can come. And you can see, all the other activities that we do, if we take them without any restriction, what are the consequences? We definitely have very serious consequences. So we can see that the protection or the long-term benefit that we are looking at, it's very obvious. I mean, it's not something very difficult to understand. We can take very simple examples like these from our lives, and we can understand that the regulations are necessary and they do bring a lot of benefit. So freedom, this verse is basically promising us the freedom. And here is the slide that that I mentioned, that outcome of this regulation is the freedom, right? So as I mentioned, the simple example of unwanted habits in an irregulated life. If we try to bring our habits under control, which are not so good habits, about say alcohol or sex outside the marriage, or gambling, or cheating, or any other kinds of activities that can harm the society, all of that. So if we get rid of these habits, and if you regulate our lives in terms of, as I said before, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, then in the normal life also we can experience this freedom. And it doesn't have to be spiritual freedom immediately. It's a simple freedom that we say we become free from anxiety. For example, a person who gives up the habit of alcoholism, that person can be free from anxiety. Otherwise, the alcoholic can be constantly under anxiety as to how they're going to obtain another glass of drink, where they're going to go, how they have money to get the alcohol. All of those anxieties can go. So you can see the freedom. Similarly, the disease, there's freedom from disease because that person's health can improve. Financial troubles can go away, social troubles can go away. So you can see giving up the unnecessary, unwanted habits can bring so much of general freedom, which is not necessarily even spiritual. But not only that, but this regulated life that we're talking about brings freedom from slavery to these habits. Because as we know, that the people who are too much addicted to any of these things, alcohol or sex or gambling or any other unwanted habits, they become slaves to these habits. They have to, even the drug addiction is also very common. Even though, in general, we don't like, at least, the older generations, we don't go for drugs, but still drug addiction is a big problem in the society. But regulated life, which follows the scriptures and which says the do's, and they follow the do's and don'ts, then there's a freedom from slavery to these habits, because people are not bound to these habits for the basic survival or for their basic happiness. You have a regulated life, you avoid certain things which are unwanted, and then you're free from getting attached to these habits. It's a very simple thing, but brings a lot. Similarly, a very important point, that when we have the regulated life as suggested by Lord Krishna, there's a freedom which comes on a slightly higher level. Like now we just saw some basic freedoms, like in terms of our social status or in terms of our mental status. But here's a slightly higher freedom that can come to us. And that freedom is the freedom to decide our own concept of happiness. See, when we have unregulated life in terms of our habits, then our happiness is very much connected to the pleasure that is obtained through these temporary objects like alcohol, sex, or cheating, or any other things. Or even, not that serious, but some people have some other habits, like, okay, some ladies may have some extreme attachment to makeup, like they cannot survive without doing makeup. I have seen some of the even older people, like they're really old, but they are so attached to doing makeup that they feel like something extremely incomplete if they don't do their makeup in the morning. So you see, they derive their happiness through these temporary miscellaneous activities. And they feel that their happiness is definitely dependent on that. If they don't drink, if they don't do a makeup, if they don't eat meat, if they don't do some movies and other general entertainment, then they are not happy. So they are, in one sense, very limited in their concept. But as soon as we take up a little bit of regulated life with devotional attitude, and we try to mold our lives suitable for bhakti, suitable for devotional service, then some of these habits that we give up, or some of the other new things that we take up just for the sake of devotional service, they can bring us a lot more happiness. And we are not bound to find our happiness in material things like, as I mentioned before, some basic material things like maybe palatable food, which is not so good for our health, or alcohol, or other entertainments, TV watching, all of that. Because we have another source of happiness. And that source of happiness is a little bit higher. It is more spiritual than our previous concept of happiness. And that's how this regulation, Vidhayatma, which is mentioned by the Lord in that verse, that brings us freedom to decide what is going to be my real concept of happiness. And as you can, and I'm sure most of us have experienced that when we joined Krishna consciousness, we did follow some do's and don'ts. We did give up some certain things, and we did take up certain new things which were more favorable to bhakti. And we all have, to so less or more extent, experienced this change in the idea of our happiness. We are no longer dependent on going back to the same group of friends who enjoy gossiping, who enjoy parties. We think that it's not necessary for us now. It's not. It doesn't bring us that much of happiness. Instead, we can see we gather on Saturdays, we gather on Sundays, we have a Bhakti Vrikshas or Sunday feast, where we have more happiness just listening to kirtan and mixing up with devotees, eating nice prasadam, helping each other, being compassionate to each other. So many ways we feel free, so many ways we feel happy. So that is the important part of the freedom that comes in. And Krishna says, if you see in the other part of the verse, let me open the verse again. It says, Vidhayatma prasadam adhigacchati. And Srila Prabhupada translate, Atma Vashyar Vidhayatma prasadam adhigacchati. And Srila Prabhupada translates that can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. So the complete mercy of the Lord comes like this, that when we regulate our senses in this way, we have satisfaction of the mind. And the meaning, one of the meanings for this word prasadam is the satisfaction of mind. Otherwise, Krishna mentions, you all know, in the Bhagavad-Gita, in the 3rd chapter, it will come that if you try to satisfy the mind by all these activities, which are not necessarily within the scriptural limitations, but which are more whimsical, then actually the mind and the senses will never get satisfied. Because the lust for which we know the need for enjoyment that we are following without any scriptural framework, whimsically, that actually agitates the mind. And Krishna mentions that in the 3rd chapter, in the 39th verse, Krishna says that this is actually like dushpurena and analena cha, which means the mind and the senses are never satisfied. And the desire to enjoy burns like fire. But the only way to get rid of this dissatisfaction and the fire in which we are all the time burning, the fire of happiness, the fire of enjoyment, that can come only when we have this regulated life under scriptural rules and regulations, because that is actually will give satisfaction of mind. Prasadam adhigacchati. Prasadam. So that is the satisfaction of mind. And in the couple of next verses, Krishna gives the whole chain. With the satisfaction of the mind, there is peace of the mind. The peace of the mind creates a favorable situation to go deeper into our spiritual understanding, spiritual progress, and then we get real happiness. And with real happiness, if we spend our lives centered around Krishna, then it's actually our liberation from the bondage. We can talk a lot about what kind of bondage is it, but just briefly, is the bondage of the bodily concept of life, the bondage which Prahlad Maharaj explains really well. Mithopadhyeta gruhavratanam adanta gobir tamishram, and then punah sharvitacharanam. So that kind of bondage where we don't even know until we actually take up some scriptural study what kind of bondage we are in. But actually there's a bondage of cycle of birth and death in which we are bound. But so this will come, gradually. It's not like sudden. That may not happen suddenly, but as we gradually take steps, small steps towards understanding what the regulations of the scriptures mean, how I can implement them in my life, and slowly we can understand that I am free from my habits. I'm not a go das anymore, right? I'm not a slave of my senses, which demand all the time different things whimsically, but I'm actually in control of my senses. Like Krishna says, Atmavashid, right? He says Atmavashid, which means I can control my senses to some extent, and then we can experience happiness. All of us can experience satisfaction of the mind as we take up Krishna consciousness, and we do experience peace and spiritual progress. So this is the whole sequence of what happens when the regulations are taken up as per Krishna's recommendation. And I think Prabhupada is in a very interesting way has given us some easy ways for this regulated lifestyle. And he says there are a couple of lectures actually he was giving, and he mentioned. Okay, so let me see if I can. So what he mentions is that I don't think I can show you the screen, but basically he says it's we do have bodies, we have these senses, we have the sense demands. So make best use of the bad bargain. That you have senses, you have to enjoy in some way, but you enjoy them in a regulated way, and that will make the best use of your body, this situation. And then you can do that only with the help of bhakti. So he's saying that regulation is easy with bhakti or devotional lifestyle. And I'll read one or two lines from there. He says that, okay, I think, let me just go back. It's first of all, he says devotional lifestyle, which means we take up things which are centered around Krishna, and all of us probably have some or the other devotional lifestyle that we are following. We are following chanting, we are doing deity worship at home, and sometimes we go to the temple for deity worship. So Srila Prabhupada in his lecture was mentioning about this easy way because it's natural. And why it's natural? Because of the loving propensity we put in Krishna, and that's how it's easy to do something with regulation because it's pleasing Krishna. It's not something which is imposed on us, but as the spirit soul, we naturally have an inclination for love, and if we put that love in Krishna, it's very easy to follow the regulations and rules. And also it's highly motivating because we know that by giving up certain things or by taking up certain new things which are favorable to bhakti, I'm pleasing Krishna, I'm moving in my devotional life, I'm getting more peace of mind, I'm getting more happiness, my whole family is harmonious in this way. So in this way, it's very highly motivating, and that's why also it's easy to follow. Now, Srila Prabhupada gives a lot of emphasis on deity worship in one of his classes, particularly for this point of regulated lifestyle. And he says that there are so many activities that can be done under this deity worship program. So naturally, people have to wake up early. They have to do Mangalarti, chant, read Srila Prabhupada books. This will naturally put us into a lifestyle which will avoid unnecessary things. which will avoid some unwanted spending of time or wasting of time into things which are not needed, which will not bring us necessarily satisfaction. But doing the deity worship will give us a regulated bodily and mental lifestyle. So the example is Amrish Maharaj. He was all the time busy with all his senses. But for us, of course, deity worship, some people may or may not be able to do. But chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra on the beads on a regulated basis and committed basis, like committed in terms of time, committed in terms of number of rounds. If that can be done, that itself is a huge, huge regulation to our lifestyle. Because chanting is not only regulation to the body, but mainly a regulation to the mind. Because see, when we chant, we are naturally limiting the mind from going many different places, which would otherwise go. If we are just doing something, some activities at home, some chores at home, then your mind is free to go anywhere and plan any other things. But when we sit down for chanting, we first of all make a plan of how we are going to manage the time for chanting. So we obviously are very efficient. We take the time to make sure that we have 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And that way, we not only save the time, but we also, when we actually chant, our mind is focused on Krishna's name. And we can actually see that is actually keeping our mind from going many, many unwanted places. So chanting is a great regulation that can bring so much benefit to us. So that's Srila Prabhupada's recommendation, that regulation is very easy with the help of bhakti. And he not only said that, but Srila Prabhupada actually taught us through the scripture, right? This is the first lesson he gave to us in the Bhagavad-Gita. But that's not it. Srila Prabhupada, he actually created these platforms for us in all these temples all across the globe. And not only temples and the deities, temples and deities may not be useful if there are no people actually following bhakti path. So he not only created these temples and the deities, but he also created the people who are actually, I think by mistake, I closed, that's okay. So so as you can see, the couple of generations from Srila Prabhupada's introduction of Krishna consciousness, they have, the men and the women all over the world have given us so much of examples, role models that we can actually follow them and see how they have, let me go back actually. Yeah, so he created the platform, he created the people, the devotees, and by looking at the examples of these men and women from these couple of generations from all over the world, we can actually see how simple and easy and beneficial is this regulated devotional lifestyle is. And that's Srila Prabhupada's contribution, mercy upon us, that he has given this to us. So in conclusion, I would like to say that if you see this verse again, there are 2 aspects. One is the freedom from attachment and aversion, and the other one is the regulated life, right? So this is how the bhakti can be done in a wonderful way. For freedom from attachment and aversion is your internal practice, is the practice that the devotees will do in their hearts. When the difficult time comes for avoiding temptations, difficult time for making some decisions, difficult time to say, to face unwanted things in lives, all of that is practiced by the devotees in their hearts. That how do I transcend this attachment and aversion? And the other part of the verse, which is regulated discipline lifestyle in devotional service, is the external thing. Like we follow some rules and regulations of lifestyle, we give up some things which are not wanted, we take up some things which are beneficial, and then we take up some devotional practices, chanting, deity worship, reading Srila Prabhupada's book. So that's an external thing. So internally and externally, in that combination, the devotee can completely get the benefit of this regulation. And the benefit is, as we spoke before, be satisfaction, happiness, peace of mind, and spiritual realization. So this is how the conclusion is. And I think I spoke enough. I hope it was somehow useful, somehow connected to your own life. It was my endeavor to make it very practical and connecting. So please give me some feedback if I missed some point, if you didn't understand, if you didn't like, if you thought something could have been said, or if you have any questions on something that you're dealing with. So we can try our best to answer. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you so much, Mataji, for that great rundown of the verse and its meanings and its applications. I'll give everyone a moment to kind of gather their thoughts and, you know, formulate some questions or comments or feedback they want to give to Mataji. But in the meanwhile, I just want to do a few quick announcements for upcoming events. So let me just share my screen. There we go. Oh, right. Okay. So it should be visible right now. So we are continuing virtual programming due to COVID. So this upcoming Wednesday for Wednesday Sangha, we will be having a talk by His Grace Murli Krishna Das. It'll be in Hindi. And the topic is on COVID or no COVID, depend on Krishna. So look forward to that. So please attend at 8:30 if you can on Wednesday. And the upcoming Sunday, we'll have a talk by His Grace Krishna Varam Das at the same time like today. So please join if you can. And for our regular programming, we do continue to have weekly Bhakti Riksha. If you're not already attending one, you know, reach out to one of us. We can, you know, link you up with one of the Bhakti Rikshas and you can start attending our weekly programs as well. We also have morning meditation japa from 6 to 8 every day. So please join if you're awake and get some morning meditation japa done with us together. And we also have Bhagavad-Gita reading from Monday to Friday, just a short amount of time during your work day, or if you're home from 12 to 12:15 Eastern. So please join if you can. All right, so that's about it for programming. Is Rajveer on, by the way? He sang, if anyone wasn't there, he was singing Nirsimha prayers today. It's his birthday today. He's a very dedicated Sunday school student. So I'm not sure if he can come on video, but if everyone could, you know, say aloud 3 Haribols for him to give him blessings so that he can, you know, continue in Krishna consciousness and gain Krishna prema and continue services. So 3 loud Haribols. Haribol!
Haribol!
A very happy Krishna conscious birthday to Rajveer. So I think, was anyone about to say something? I think I interrupted. Okay, no, it's fine. Okay, so without further ado, we'll head on to questions for Mataji. So here's what we can do. If anyone wants to, you know, personally ask a question, you can raise your hand and we'll start calling on people. If you have audio issues or if you want to remain anonymous, you can send it in the chat or to me personally, and then I can ask the questions as well. So if you're ready to ask a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself right now. Ramchandra, go ahead.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mataji, for a wonderful class. I have a question. I have 2 questions, actually. So one was about regulation. One was very nicely presented about how regulation can be beneficial or it can hurt you also. So someone who has, let's say, is trying to be regulated or has been regulated, but then gets, you know, off track. What is the easiest way to get back on track and have a regulated life? Regulated life as in not just the 4 principles, but, you know, the time to eat, time to sleep, time to chant, time to finish your work, time for your sadhana. What is the quickest way to get back on track?
So the quickest, there are a couple of them. I would say keeping devotee association is the best, because the devotees can inspire this person, even though this person has gone back to whatever. Getting inspired, just looking at and discussing with other devotees personally has benefited me. Like when, in the beginning, many times we have these times when we decide, okay, I'm going to give up the tea because the tea is not the best. I'm going to give onion, garlic, whatever. And then somebody starts again because they have another friend, they have family, and they can't keep it. So when you have association of devotees, when you regularly attend programs, you just hear from them, you listen to them, and when they say some things like how they are doing it, how they have been able to manage it, then I feel inspired. Oh, if that's the case, then I can definitely go back and restart again, retry again, and I can do it. So that's my personal experience, that devotee association is the best that works to keep us back on track. Regulated chanting and reading Srila Prabhupada books is another source of inspiration for myself and for many devotees, because reading even a small amount of reading even a small for a small time, any of Prabhupada's books can give us some quick inspirations to realize and go back. So I think some of these have worked for me, and I hope they work for many other people.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah, it seems like
in bhakti, bhakti is always collective, right? I mean, we do bhakti on a personal level when we are chanting, but there's a huge other aspect of collectiveness of bhakti. And that's why collective bhakti can save us from these temporary fall downs. So it's a very beautiful concept in the community of devotees coming under the temple roof and helping each other, supporting each other, because we are all, going to make mistakes. We are all prone to temptations. It's not easy, but the devotees are the people who can save you and who can keep you back on track.
thank you. Thank you very much. The other question I had was, you also work as a Hindu chaplain in for hospice and healthcare hospitals. And when we talked about anxiety and depression, that it's very much there. So how do you bring in Krishna consciousness? And if you do, how do you see them? Do you see them? Do you see a change in them? Do you see a relief in them? When you're lying in the deathbed, or after somebody leaves the body and the family is in anxiety and they call upon you and say, okay, can you please talk to them? What are the things that you say? And because all of us come in that situation when we face where somebody's either passed away or somebody is in their last stage. And as a chaplain, as a Hindu chaplain, what are some things that helps the other side? Can you just share some experiences?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I see many Hindu families, but I also see many non-Hindu families. Like Christian, there are Jews, there are within Christianity, there are so many traditions. So I see a variety. But as far as Hindus are concerned, again, I have seen Jains. I have seen people who are just, they are devotees of Satya Sai Baba. They are devotees of Ganesha and Lakshmi and Lord Shiva. So it's not necessarily that I'm just a Hindu family and I give them the Bhagavad-Gita lessons. Okay, here's the soul, take this. It's not that easy. So basically what I do is I understand their background, first of all, and then depending upon their background, we speak to them in that language. But the beauty is that in any Vedic tradition within our Hinduism, it all points out to the eternal nature of the spirit. And I point to them this feature of the life in a way that they will appreciate in their own language. There are many other simple techniques that are not necessarily based on scriptures that we use to help them what should I say? So there's a whole big aspect called grieving, right? So how do they grieve? So we basically tell them to grieve healthily. So we help them talk about the person who has passed away. We help them celebrate the person's good qualities. So it's very general. I mean, once in a while, I find families who have Bhagavad-Gita in their lives, and then we talk on those levels. But many times as devotees, now, where do I connect this question to our discussion here? Many times you may have friends and family, and they have some situations like this. And if you want to help them, you may not jump immediately upon something scriptural, because they may not connect with you. So as devotees, we may develop this compassionate quality of listening to them first, understanding where they are in their level, in their situation, in their spiritual understanding. And based on that, very gently, we can introduce some small ideas, concepts that can be digested by them at that time. And then eventually, by being compassionate to them, by being friendly with them, by listening to them, by giving them the proper support, one day you will be able to say, hey, I have benefited from this book, Bhagavad-Gita. Can you take it? This will help you. So my point is that what I have learned in chaplaincy is that we have to go very gently with people. If we really want to give them Bhagavad-Gita, we want to preach them something, we can be fanatic, we cannot be too much fast. So, and it's a good quality of a devotee anyway, to be compassionate, to be tolerant and patient, and like Arjuna, we always talk about the soft heart, in Bhagavad Gita. So developing that soft heart can help us actually. So this is my takeaway from my chaplaincy experience, that can actually benefit in general all the devotees.
Thank you.
Madhukita Mataji, you can go ahead.
Hare Krishna Mataji, nice to see you. Thank you so much for enlightening all of us. Very beautiful session. I really like a few points you mentioned about your beginning only, how we are not foreign to these regulations. And also very nice that you gave example of when we take a medicine, we follow certain rules and regulations that are prescribed. And the same applies in our life also, in regards to following these rules and regulations according to scriptures. And also you explain about how the animals and human beings, they both have regulations, but how we are distinct from them in some sense. And it's not a protection. If we follow regulations, then it's not a burden, but it's a protection for us. So that was really a good point. And you also mentioned that if we follow that within the scriptural framework, then it is allowed. But then as a neophyte devotee, how do we understand what is within the scriptural framework and what is not? Right? How one should take that?
So when we become students of Bhagavad Gita, we come to know in different chapters. Krishna explains these things in a very great detail. If you study the modes of nature, this whole topic in the Bhagavad Gita will give you a very detailed picture about everything that in terms of our food, in terms of our decisions, choices that we make, in terms of the emotions that we express, in terms of the charity that we give, in terms of the karma that we generally do. What is the best? What is in the middle, which is kind of acceptable, but still you have to progress, and something which is completely abominable. So Krishna gives a very good plan. He's a very kind Bhagwan. He is not asking us to take any radical steps. So based upon these categories, there's 3 modes of nature: Sattva Guna, Raja Guna, and Tamo Guna. So when we study these things as a part of Bhagavad Gita study, we realize that, oh, these things are mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, they're not to be done. And the reasons are given why not to be done. They're completely abominable. So people are advised to give them up as soon as possible. But then in the middle, the Rajoguna, which most of us are in, there are certain things which we realize, oh, I connect with this Rajoguna because yes, I have these hankerings, I have these ambitions, or I take my decisions like this, or I have my habits like this. But then Krishna gives us a plan. So he says that these are okay, but the best part is that you go towards the mode of goodness, which is Sattva Guna. And then he tells what is there in the Sattva Guna. So it's a very nice and gradual process that we can follow. And that way we can understand how to actually, what is do and what is don't do. Like what are the do's and don'ts in the Gita. It's a very detailed description there. Yeah. Is that answers your question?
Yes, Mataji. Thank you so much. Yep.
Satish Prabhu, you can go ahead now.
Krishnaji. Yeah, I was kind of doing something else, so I was not. I picked up some points. I mean, I could not come on video as well. So I mean, a lot of points. But one thing that struck me is that as kids, they feel pressured when they're restricted, and as they grow up, they realize and they try to do the same thing because they know that it's valuable, and they do that for their kids also, right?
Yeah.
That's a nice point. I have a question. Like devotees develop relationships among in the community. They build relationships, right? Most of the times it is based on some kind of wavelength. Devotees, there are different kinds of people. There are different personalities, different backgrounds, and they create as a big community. And there are like small groups, and then there are these, very thick relationships between one or two or many, like small group of devotees, kind of, right? And then, take one, relationship between two devotees, and then they are connected. They are pretty much in the same platform, practicing everything, following all regulatory principles. And at some point, one of them kind of, some reason falls back on something, and then maybe the guilty that one person has pulls himself out of that relationship. He tries to distance himself, right? And that relationship dwindles, right? And but he finds meaningful relationships outside where he gets he's acceptable, right? So this could be because he feels guilty, or it could also be because he gets judged by the other person, other devotee. And this is in Krishna consciousness context, right? But in the outside world, we all kind of promote this idea and like this idea that, accept somebody as they are, as and let them develop their own way of they make their own progress. And then we don't talk bad about them, try not to judge that person. But why can't we do that in Krishna consciousness also, and and not kind of push them around or judge them, or help them continue and then build relationships back again.
So judging is a very big problem. Whether it's devotion or not devotion, doesn't matter. In every sphere of life, judgment is very problematic. I think there are so many scriptural examples from Mahabharata, Ramayana, and devotees can spend some time systematically understanding these personalities and how there was a possibility of judgment and how they avoided judging and how they benefited in general. That can really enlighten us. And there are some very good devotees who have studied this problem of judgment, and they have given some nice instructions. So we can follow those instructions. And they're very much in the context of bhakti. For example, you mentioned this particular case of two devotees connected, but one doesn't follow with the same speed, and the other person judges and then spoils the relationship. So there could be some methods as to how we can avoid judging and spoiling our relationships. One is that practicing broad-mindedness, like, okay, humility, first of all, humbleness, like you are progressing doesn't mean that the other person should progress in the same way. They're accepting them that they are also right in their own way, and understanding their intention. Sometimes the person may have some limitations for whatever circumstances they are going through in their lives, but their intention is to come back to bhakti. So look at the intention. So judge them by the intentions, not by the actions. That can solve our problem to some extent. And the other one, Mahaprabhu always explains that you have to look at the good qualities, Saragrahi, Vaishnava, you have to look at the essence and you have to look at the good qualities and ignore the bad qualities. So if the person has fallen down in one particular area, he has not been able to keep up the standards, but look at something else that he is doing well in bhakti, or he has some other good attributes that are being used in bhakti. So focus on them. And then ultimately pray to Krishna for if this person is not able to keep up with the standards, pray to Krishna that Krishna, please help this person and bring him up. So there are so many ways. My point is that there's so many ways we can talk about this problem of judgment and find some solutions. It could be a community learning. We can do some case study. There's so many ways we can learn together this, how to avoid this judgmental aspect every time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's there are many ways to address that. But I'm just trying to see, what kind of, I mean, what is that we are lacking? That really make us okay to judge somebody within the community, but we are okay to follow the general idea which is followed outside. We are not I'm not saying, when we say we, not all, like some of us, we are still we're still progressing, but we also I know that like you were saying, like we have to exercise that practice, exercise that, but why we take it for granted that within this being in the community we can do it, but not like outside we are still.
We want very quick results in bhakti sometimes. That's our problem. we have to understand that people come from all backgrounds. And just take Srila Prabhupada's examples, how much compassionate, how much tolerant he was. We judge people for small things. Prabhupada had people around him who were not even having some basic habits or basic life moralities. And he tolerated as a Vaishnava. He wanted to bring welfare to them. And he was very smart in dealing with them and bringing them back and keeping them in. So why can't I be similar in my compassion and my tolerance to Srila Prabhupada, as Srila Prabhupada was? Why don't I follow in his footsteps on this path, on this particular aspect? I'm following in his footsteps for deity worship and chanting and showing that I'm such a great Vaishnava. I dress up in a way. I have a lot of show that I'm a great devotee. But then why don't I follow Srila Prabhupada's heart? His heart, look at his heart. So why your question is, why do we do that? We do it because we are immature. And as you said, that in a community, when we come together, not everybody is at the same level. So we have we can't expect the results just like that. We have to be very, very compassionate, and that's a big thing, to grow, to develop the community. So some of the community leaders who are trying to develop a congregation, they have to be equipped with this kind of quality where they understand everybody coming from their positions, and they are very tolerant, they are forgiving. So I think discussing these things in general with the help of spiritual personalities, examples, and just in general, like sometimes taking up these kind of workshops, you talk about humility, you talk about tolerance, you talk about real compassion. All these discussions can also enlighten us. And the best thing is that you influence by your actions. Another person may be judging people, another person may be intolerant, maybe impatient. Let them do what they're doing. But when it comes to you, you behave like a first-class gentleman devotee. You don't judge people. So you try to explain to others by your own example. That's in your control. What is in your control? Is it in your control to go and change that person? To tell that person, don't judge other people. No, you can't do that. You can't change people. What you can do is within your circle of influence. And my circle of influence is that what I can do, and I can make a change by acting in a certain way. And that's what I'll do. And leave others to Krishna's care, let them do, because we can't make changes on a drastic level, but I can make a change from me onwards. That's what I personally do. So that's otherwise.
Thank you.
I think a very nice congregation, wonderful, very interesting and intelligent questions. It's a real joy to, associate with you.
Madhav is up next. Go ahead, Madhav.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam Prabhupada. Dandavat Pranams, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Mataji, my question is that, so we hear that when we're doing devotional service, we hear, okay, the heart's getting purified and everything. But in maybe very briefly, you can explain, like, what is scientifically, in a subtle way, what is actually happening with our mind and our intelligence? Like, what is actually getting purified? Like, what was the setting of our subtle consciousness before devotional service, and what's happening to it after devotional service? So if you could elaborate on that. Thank you.
So I want to think about some verses from the Gita. As I said before, we are affected by the modes of nature, right? So there's Sattva Guna, Raja Guna, Tama Guna, and not just the three divisions, but a lot of combinations. So I am not sure how much I'm carrying a part of Raja Guna and Tama Guna while I'm trying to become a devotee. right? So there are many, I would say, convictions of life that we have in the beginning. So people are convinced that I am such and such person. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm old, I'm young, I am beautiful, I belong to this country, I belong to this race. So these are our convictions of life. And we drive our decisions, we all drive our lives based on these. But when we take up bhakti, and there's a transformation in our identity, like who we are. And I think that's the point where we start changing. And you said, what exactly happens to our mind, our consciousness, right? So the mind is purified because we, especially in terms of the current verse, the regulations will bring the mind to a satisfactory level, because the mind's hankerings for unwanted things are reduced. And when the mind's hankerings are reduced, the peacefulness, the satisfaction and the peacefulness increase. And the devotee is able to remain happy within given circumstances. And gradually the consciousness is transformed from self-centeredness to being a part of Krishna's. And that's how there is a change in the mindset of people. So there's a gradual change in the mindset as to what was my identity before, what was my concept of happiness before. It gets changed. That I am necessarily not a Christian, I'm not necessarily a Hindu, but I'm in the bigger sense, I'm a living entity who is connected with the Supreme Divine, whatever you can say in that way, the Krishna. In the beginning, people may not immediately agree that Krishna is Bhagwan, but they have this idea that I'm a part of the Supreme Divine. And just knowing the overall Bhagavad-Gita lessons, just being a student of the Gita and understanding these personalities from Bhagavatam, they just broaden our perspective of who we are and what's the purpose of my life, and what is the source of my happiness. And all of this gradually purifies our existence by reducing the modes of tama and raja, and increasing the mode of goodness or sattva guna. And being situated in sattva guna, we are able to understand the scriptures in a very clear way. And from there we take the progress. So I think that's the whole thing in my understanding. If I miss something, please add. I know it might not be the best perfect answer here, but this is the overall progress that I have experienced myself. And that's how I'm saying that.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Does that help you in some way? Like, I don't know what was the purpose of your asking that question?
Yeah, I just wanted, I was asking that question because many times many devotees say that we get purified. When we're doing devotional service, we're getting purified. So like, okay, I understand I have certain anarthas, and then the anarthas are getting flushed away and they're getting replaced with spiritual service, mood for loving service. So I was just thinking from a little bit spiritually scientific standpoint, what is actually happening? Because I know all that the mind is above the intelligence, but then what happens that the intelligence again takes over. When the intelligence takes over, then we can see that the four regulated principles are actually something we have to follow. When the mind is above, the mind is above because of not having proper spiritual background in the first place. So like that I was talking.
Yeah,
but
okay.
very nice answer. Yeah.
Okay, I hope you got some benefit from that.
Yes, definitely, Mataji. I like the point very much of the Srimad Bhagavatam. That reminded me to pay more attention in reading about Bhagavatam. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Nothing, Jesse, block another day.
Go ahead.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Srila Prabhupada. Jai Jai.
Very nice class, Mataji. Very wonderful, wonderful. I don't have any question, but I just because you know me.
Right. No, I was hoping that I get to see you and talk to you somehow. Yeah, that's good that you really
Yeah.
took time to personally come on the spot and thank me.
Thank you so much for such wonderful points you gave us. So many points.
I think more than my class, your questions, all of your questions were very smart. I like your questions more than my class.
I'm not. All these devotees are such a wonderful, those who ask questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel so inspired, like even someone else asks an intelligent question, it benefits us so much, right? Just by listening to the question and the answer. That's very
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mataji.
again for bringing me here. Thank Ramchandra Prabhu for giving me a chance to study, because once you have to give a class, you have to study. So that was my opportunity to really go back again in the second chapter. So I really appreciate and thank you for giving me this chance to present Srila Prabhupada's wisdom and practical suggestions for just making us better people in this world.
Thank you, Mataji, for wonderful class. Yeah, it was so many points you discussed, and yeah, thank you, Mataji, for the nice examples too.
Okay, I guess that's a last call for any questions, comments, feedback from anyone else on the call. I think I'll take this moment to say some of my own I guess it's more of a comment rather than a question. But I really wanted to kind of, appreciate the fact that you brought up, because usually when people say principles, you immediately think of the regular principles like no meat eating, like things you do when you do vows, right? And you're kind of just getting started. But I appreciated the parallels you were drawing with the sleeping, eating, mating, and defending, and that what kind of restrictions we do when we, in ISKCON and in general, even before ISKCON, right? So there's a really nice parallel that I saw that, a lot of these things prevent different kinds of addictions, and those are things you kind of learn about in school and health class and things like that, about how there's different addictions and how it can kind of take over your life and in different areas, right? Society wise, your relationships, your finances, your ability to maintain a sane mentality and go after things you actually want to pursue, right? So I think that framework of thinking of it as just kind of trying to regulate behaviors that can get way out of control if you're not regulating it is really useful for people who are, beginning to understand the scriptures and, kind of put themselves in the mindset of why am I doing what I'm doing, which is kind of lacking. And if that's lacking, then that's really hard to, adhere to consistently. So yeah, so thank you for that. It was really great parallels you were drawing, so I really appreciated that.
I think for the youth it could be really a great lesson, because you can explain to them in their terms. I have seen one youth, they just made a small mistake and then they had to go and the police arrested them, and then they are dealing with the arrest. So these small things, but if you have a little regulation, it can such a long effect it can bring. So for the youth, it's very beautiful to explain in their terms, and just in general, and not jump upon our regulated principles as such. Yeah.
So once again, thank you so much for joining us, giving us your association and a little bit of your knowledge to us.
Giving me a lot of joy to discuss and hear from you and just see you and speak with you this evening. Thank you so much.
Of course, and thank you for coming. Hopefully we'll see you again sometime soon. And